All right, we're good.
Beauty. Awesome. All right. So let's get started here. Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Alan. It's Julian over here from
Julian.
uh, from Revive Physiotherapy. So what we're going to do is run you through a bit of a webinar today. It's really challenging to put together an exercise program at home. There's a ton of stuff online, and a lot of people are confused, and a lot of people are hurting because they're not exercising the way that they were, and because of that, their activity suffer. They're not feeling as well, and often they're getting hurt. So the idea here is not just to give you a workout program to do; it's to give you the tools that you need to actually design and run a workout program at home. So we'll run through some introductions. I'll introduce myself, and then I'll pass it off to Julian here. So my name is Alan Richter. I'm a physiotherapist. I actually grew up in a small town to the east of here. Don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Toronto, little town there. And grew up there. I did my undergrad there at York University in kinesiology, and then moved out west, actually. I went out to Alberta for about 7 or 8 years, worked in research there for a little bit, and then went back to school to become a physio. And then decided to move back, join all you lovely people in Hamilton, Ontario. Wasn't going back to Toronto, and now I'm here. So I've worked at a few clinics in town, and now I've got my own clinic here, Revive Physiotherapy, which is at Dunedin and Aberdeen in the Kirkendall neighborhood.
And my name is Julian. I had a similar sort of approach to physio. I started off doing kinesiology at McMaster, took a year off after that, worked as a personal trainer, and then got accepted to Western, where I did my master's in physiotherapy. Graduated there this past year, and I now work at McMaster University, and I also work at Revive with Alan. And I guess we'll just start it off from there. So, from my understanding, a lot of people right now are pretty much using walking as their main form of exercise. And walking is obviously fantastic, and it can really help stave off that cabin fever that a lot of us are probably experiencing right now. But walking on its own doesn't really give you the benefits that a more intense exercise program can. So, like a more vigorous exercise program has benefits that walking just doesn't get you. So, for example, vigorous activity or strenuous activity can improve your sleep, which sleep as a whole can have a cascade of effects on your health. Actually, a book that I would recommend to everyone is Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker. It's a fantastic book.
Fantastic. That's really
Yeah,
great.
it's a great book. Really actually changed my whole perception towards sleeping. I now value it more than, way more than I used to. And obviously, when you do things that are strenuous and more tiring, you're going to be more tired by the end of the day. And that sleep's going to come way more naturally to you. Also, vigorous activity, like when I say vigorous, I just mean things that get your heart rate up, things that make you sweat a little bit more than walking typically would. Obviously, can improve strength, can improve tissue health, can improve bone health and bone density as well. That staves off things like osteoporosis far more effectively than just walking. So that's why I'm a big advocate of working in some more strenuous or vigorous exercise into your routine.
And the bone health stuff's really interesting because the stuff that's coming out now is they're finding you actually have to do weight-bearing exercises in order to build bone strength and stability. So it's almost like bone requires some stress on it in order for it to remodel and grow and thicken. So when you do any sort of weight-bearing exercise, especially a loaded one, that stimulates that bone to grow. And resistance exercise is now showing the same effects, that it increases that bone remodeling. So if you are someone who is at risk from osteoporosis, or you have osteoporosis, if you do have osteoporosis, you should exercise safely. But if you're at risk for osteoporosis, strength training becomes really, really important. Another adaptation which is really important, in my mind, very much overlooked with exercise. I find a lot of times exercise has gotten this rap as it's there for weight loss, but there's so many other important benefits to exercise that get overlooked. And one of the biggest ones in my mind are cardiovascular adaptations. So your heart's a muscle. It does get bigger and more efficient as you exercise, but it's also how oxygen gets exchanged with your body. And I know there's a lot of talk now with COVID around the cardiovascular system and shortness of breath. And exercise actually enhances the communication between your heart, between your lungs, and even more than that, it increases circulation. So you actually get blood vessels laid down within your muscles at your extremities to enhance circulation. You get more blood going through your muscles, more what's called venous return, which is blood coming back, and everything's enhanced in that way. So in addition to all the other benefits, the fact that your body gets more efficient in a cardiovascular sense, which has all sorts of really important health outcomes, is there as well. In addition, exercise helps you reduce pain. Your body craves movement, it needs movement, and when we're not moving and not moving towards the level that we used to be, very often the body expresses signals of pain. So by exercising, it helps reduce signals of pain. And then there's the mood benefits, right? So very often, or they find that exercise actually enhances a lot of the hormones that get secreted that affect mood and affect levels of happiness. So the more you exercise, the happier you feel, the better you feel, the more self-efficacy. There is that side, that aesthetic side to exercise where you feel like you look better, or you do look better. But at the end of the day, there's way, way more advantages to exercise than just that.
I just want to add to that too. Like a lot of research is showing not only, a pain relieving effect of up to 45 minutes post exercise, but now research is also showing that it can actually last up to 24 hours from one exercise bout. So those effects can be pretty profound.
Right, and it doesn't take a whole lot. I mean, when we talk about vigorous exercise, we're talking about, there's a scale called rate of perceived exertion. We'll get into the actual specifics about how to exercise, but you don't need to be very, very high on that scale to get effects. Like you can be up to a 3 out of 10. So anything like a light exercise, so a little more than usual, will already give you some of those added effects.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is something I'm passionate about, and it doesn't really matter for a younger population. But when you get older, there's this idea of 1 rep max living. It's a term kind of taken from powerlifting and strength sports, where you test how much weight you can lift for 1 repetition, right? And so very, very strong athletes might have a huge amount of weight, but for an older and aging population, that 1 rep maximum can be a load of laundry that they have to lift. And if you don't have sufficient strength to lift that load of laundry, we set ourselves up for all sort of injury, or all sorts of pain or dysfunction, or even inability to kind of carry out our lives. So strength training when we're young has a really important carryover to when we're older, where we're not living, or our strength isn't at that threshold of the maximum that we can lift as much as maybe a bag of groceries or something that we need day to day. So really important not to hit that point where we're living at our maxes, that we have some capacity beyond those maxes so we can keep moving.
And like just one thing that I'll say that like summarizes a lot of that. You mentioned like the bone health and the bone density and the cardiovascular adaptations. Essentially, like the body is one big adaptive machine. Like it has tremendous ability to adapt to stresses. So when you are talking about stress of any kind in the form of exercise in any form, if you stress your body, it will adapt. If you put the stress on your body now, you'll be able to handle more and more and more as you go forward. And it has that cumulative adaptations that you can manifest in you. All right, moving on. So what we aim to do today is really make things simple in terms of where to start with exercise. So I will say that there are 2 main principles that need to be thought about when you're exercising. The first one is the SAID principle, or specific adaptations to impose demands. All that means is that if you are looking for a desired outcome, you have to train that outcome. So for example, if you want to get stronger, you need to strength train. You will not get stronger by simply walking. And that's pretty much it in a nutshell. The other principle that is very crucial to exercise is the overload principle. All this means is that, like we said before, if you want to get stronger or better at something, or have a more robust cardiovascular system, you need to overload it. You need to stress it. What that means is that if you're doing the same exercise every single day with no changes, you're going to hit a little bit of a plateau. In order to kind of get above that plateau and continue to make gains in whatever you want, you need to adequately overload or stress that system. Even if it's in the form of, just like 5 pounds on an exercise that you would typically do. If you put 5 pounds on that, that is an overload to an extent, right? And essentially there's 2 main ways to overload something. You can increase the intensity of it, which is essentially increasing the weight or the difficulty or even the speed on the treadmill. Or you can also increase the volume. And the volume just means like the amount or the time you're doing it. So increasing the volume could be something as simple as, if you were training twice a week, now you're training 4 times a week. And that's an increase in volume just like that. And the one other thing I'll add is that when I say overload, I think sometimes people can, think about that as like a massive overload, but it really is, it can be very minute overloads. It can be, like I said, 2.5 pounds or an extra 0.5 kilometers on your run. just little steps to push your overall capabilities upwards.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, because I think with fitness, because there's this huge fitness industry, that's really there really to make money. There's been a lot of terms that have been coined just to kind of make exercise sound more demanding and more intense than it really, really has to be. And so what Julian said, that overload sounds like a huge term or a big change that need to happen, but really it doesn't take a whole lot. And if anything, it's worse to take on too much too soon. And
Mm-hmm.
because that sets you up for failure and sets you up for injury, whereas you make small changes as things go on, that's what makes the biggest effect and allows you to kind of build up cumulatively. I know a lot of people come into the clinic and say, you know, oh, I'm not as in shape as I used to be, and I'm going to try and get back into it. And they try and run at this same or exercise at the same intensity they did 20, 30 years ago. And it's not necessarily that they're too old to do that activity now. It's just they haven't done it for a long time. So it takes time to overload slowly to build that capacity up again. Because exercise really is just a stress that you put on your body, and it's a good stress because your body adapts to that stress. Our body adapts when it's made a little bit uncomfortable. And so that level of discomfort doesn't have to be a painful discomfort. It's just a little bit different than what we're used to.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to get now into the kind of the meat and potatoes of what the webinar is going to be, which is talking about how to construct an exercise program. There's a ton of stuff out there. Every gym is now doing online training. YouTube, there's so many channels of things to do. People are calling the clinic, say, hey, you know, can you give me a home program? People really want to know what to do, but nobody really has the independence to kind of create their own program. So what we're going to do is start from square one, right at the bottom, and build things up. And square one really is figuring out what your goals are. Like Julian said before, it's quite specific. Like if you take someone who's a cyclist and then you go and tell them to run, they might be in the greatest shape ever. They're going to struggle with that activity because it's a new movement. We don't do well with novel movements. Our bodies are very, very efficient, and it takes some time to learn those movements. So step one is really just to figure out what your goals are, whether it's a specific sport, whether you want to bike, whether you want to run, whether you just want to feel healthier, get in shape, have less pain, and be able to do more around the house. So that's step one. You don't have to get hyper specific with anything. It could be general fitness, feeling good. You might want to get really strong. You might want to get stronger. It might be that 1 rep max living that we talked about, where you want to feel like, hey, if I have to pick a load of laundry up and carry it up the stairs, I want that to feel easy. That's a good enough goal. So it's like we said before with the overload principle. These aren't huge changes that you need to make. This isn't like you have to revamp your entire lifestyle. You can start very, very small. And it's better, if anything, it's better to start small and then build up from there. So like I said, starting conservatively is really important because that prepares your body for what it's ready to go through. Even some of the most advanced lifting programs for Olympic level athletes, when they're preparing for competition at the beginning of their season, they're not doing anything hyper specific. It's all very generalized movement. They're starting conservatively and they're building up from there. And it's the same with us. If your goal is just to carry a load of laundry up the stairs, if it's aesthetic, whatever it is, you need to start small and then build up from there in steady increments.
I will add to that as well. Like you said, if it's a new activity, that becomes like especially important because like you mentioned, the body needs some time to adapt to something that's new. So for example, if you've never lifted weights before, then you jump into an aggressive, extensive weight training program, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure. But if you gradually introduce weights into your routine, start with a more of a lighter amount of weights or lighter amount of volume, and then gradually build that up, you're setting yourself up for success in that case, as opposed to like a possible injury or just hating it, to be frank, right?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that because it's always the beginning of spring when people start running again. And then there's Around the Bay, which was canceled this year, but it's a huge race in Hamilton. And people go from doing nothing all winter long, and then they start suddenly counting the pavement, just seeing how, because they need to run a certain number of kilometers, a quite high number of kilometers, and they try and get there as fast as possible. But if you went and told someone to go squat 225 pounds tomorrow, they'd laugh at you because they say, well, I can't do that. But for some reason with other activities, people feel like that they can just go and run 23 kilometers, overnight. And any activity takes time to build up. It's just certain activities with a lower barrier to entry seem more attainable. But like you said, the body takes time to adapt to these new movements. And very often where people get into trouble with new programs or trying to exercise at home in a novel way is that they're just taking on too much too soon, as opposed to letting things slowly increase. Just because the activity seems like it's easy doesn't mean your body is necessarily ready for it.
Agreed. Yeah. And unfortunately, a lot of myths propagate from that when, people get hurt running because they've never ran before, and then they try to run 20 kilometers and then they assume, running is dangerous. But nothing is really dangerous in a vacuum like that. It just takes some time for the body to sort of adapt to it. We have to be smart about it.
Right. The other argument is people say, oh, I'm just too old. And that's also like the literature has shown that age, it does have an effect, but the extent of the effect it has is actually quite minimal compared to what we used to think. We used to think that as you got older, you couldn't do a whole lot. But now we know that if you regularly give your body a training stimulus, it can adapt to some amazing things. So age isn't really an excuse to not be able to start building up your mileage either.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so thinking about, like Alan said, there's a lot of workouts out there, and we need to sort of think about how we can independently sort of create one. Talking about what a smart workout looks like for each of you, like we said, it doesn't have to be complicated at all. We can actually make it pretty simple for ourselves. Let's say we want to start with a warm up. A warm up is always a good idea to get us not only physiologically ready for the exercise, but also like in our heads to get prepared for it, to get psyched up for it as well. So when you think about a warm up, it's whatever you need to be ready. It doesn't have to be a specific stretching routine. It doesn't have to be rolling. It doesn't have to be a specific set of exercises. If it gets the heart rate up, if it gets the blood flowing a little bit, and if you're comfortable with it, let's say you've got a warm-up routine down pat where you just like to stretch and go for a little bit of a jog or something like that, that works. It can be individualized. It doesn't have to be like some specific warm-up. If it gets you ready to go, it works. That's great. And you can experiment with that too, right? You can try a couple different things. You can try some dynamic stretching, for example. You can try some static stretching. You can try some jogging, whatever works for you. I will say though that if you're thinking about going for a run, or if you're thinking about lifting weights, your warm-up should include something that's similar. So if you're thinking about going for a run, maybe you want to warm up with some lunges, some calf raises, a little bit of some hip exercises, or even just jogging at a slower pace to get ready for it, and then getting into your jogging pace. It can be that simple when it comes to warming up. And then when you're thinking about the actual exercise, right, we'll be talking a little bit about resistance training here, but it'll apply to running as well, and we'll touch on that a little bit. But essentially, when you're dealing with weights, you have two broad categories of exercises. One is a core or a compound exercise, which is a multi-joint movement. For example, a squat. It uses the hips, the knees, the ankles, the back muscles, everything. That's a core workout. The other broad category of things is an accessory workout, which you can think about as a single joint exercise. For example, very classic, a bicep curl. That's just your elbow coming up and down. That's an accessory exercise, right? Now, to make things very simple, you can break that down very nicely, and you can say for each workout, if you get some sort of push, some sort of pull, you carry something, and you do something for your legs, you can be pretty safe to assume that you're hitting all the areas of your body that you need to hit. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. A push, a pull, a carry, and something for your legs, and you can be pretty confident that you're getting a good exercise in. After you hit those four compound movements, the push, the pull, the carry, and the legs, you can think about adding in whatever accessory exercises you want. For example, if you want to end with like we call a gun run, where you just get the arms going a little bit, some biceps, triceps, you can do that after you finish all your core exercises, and then you've got a good workout done, down pat.
Does anyone actually call it a gun run, Julian?
I do call it a gun run. It's very, very nice. Nice.
You just start yelling that out in the gym before you start doing that.
And then but the other thing past that is, I know people are always thinking about how many sets, how many reps. Again, doesn't have to be complicated. What you mainly want to think about is that by the end of your set, which a set, by the way, is a group of repetitions. So for example, one bicep curl is 1 rep. A set of 10 bicep curls is how that works, right? So you just want to think that by the end of your set, your muscles or whatever area you're hitting feels adequately tired or fatigued. By that, it's pretty simple just to think about that feeling of that, that burning sensation or a little bit of shakiness, or if it feels that if you were to do any more reps, if you were to try to do 12 instead of 10, your form would break down a little bit. So for the bicep curl, if you were getting tired, you might start using your back to give you some assistance there. That is a good example of fatigue, and that's all you're really striving for. right? If you get fatigue, if you stress the muscle adapts, and that's what you're aiming for. So, for example, you may want to start at 2 or 3 sets. If you're doing something new, 2 or 3 sets of each exercise. And then when it comes to the amount of reps, you can experiment. There's a lot of trial and error involved. So, for example, if you want to build just straight up strength, right? You should be somewhere around that 1 to 6 rep ranges. So that means after you do a set of, let's say, 6, you should be adequately tired. If you're just going for, let's say, building some muscle, or if you just like doing reps at a low weight, that's fine. You can experiment with that too. You can get that rep range up around 12, maybe even 15. But the goal, again, is to feel that fatigue at the end of that set, right? And once you've hit that, and once you've done 2, 3 sets of each exercise to that fatigue feeling, by the end of it all, you'll be feeling pretty good. You'll be feeling like you've just had a good workout that stresses everything that you need to stress. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that when it comes to picking sets, reps, or exercises. Just hit those compound movements, go to fatigue, get 2 to 3 sets in, and that's a good, solid workout.
Right. So just talking about compound movements, it sounds very complicated, but like Julian said, it's just moving more than one joint at a time. And most movements that we do day to day are compound movements. Going up the stairs is a compound movement. Picking something off the ground is a compound movement. All the movements that we do day to day are compound movements, and that's why we make them the priority for our training program. Is when we're fresh and just we've warmed up or ready to go, we take our time and we work on those compounds. So the next thing I want to talk about is how good workouts go bad. This is where people kind of get into trouble with their workouts and with their training at home. Either they burn out because of it, or they get frustrated, or sometimes they get hurt in the worst case scenario. And there's a couple of things that go on. Number one is taking on too much too soon, like we talked about, right? There's this dose response curve to exercise, almost like with taking a medication. That at some point with the exercise, you stop getting as many benefits, and then you cross a threshold, and all of a sudden you get detrimental effects. So when we take on too much too soon, our body lets us know when we often get hurt or we feel pain. Other big thing is social media is really dangerous. This is something that didn't exist about 10, 15 years ago. But now we find lots of people coming into the clinic and just talking to people day to day who get hurt, trying to emulate something they saw on social media. So social media can be a great tool, but can also be a very dangerous tool. And then it's got all sorts of other effects, which are beyond the scope of this webinar in terms of aesthetics and how people look and trying to look like a certain body image, but we won't dwell on that too much. And then focusing too much on workouts, not recovery, recovery is a really important point we're going to get to in a bit. But the workout is only one piece in the puzzle as far as fitness goes and overall health. And the last thing is not listening to your body, your surroundings. So if you're feeling pain, the whole idea of no pain, no gain, it's nonsense. Don't listen to it. Things shouldn't hurt when you're exercising. You can feel discomfort because you're getting tired of that level of fatigue that Julian talked about. We want that. That's the pain we're talking about. But sharp pain in your joints, feeling terrible, it's not a good thing. Exercise shouldn't be a chore and it shouldn't be suffering. And the other thing is safety. If you have poor balance and you're going to work on your balance and you're going to balance on one leg at home, hold on to something to make sure you don't fall over, right? Don't get hurt. Everyone's seen those fail videos on social media. Don't be like those people, right? Just think about what you're doing and make sure you're keeping it safe.
Yeah, that's a great point. I will say as well that when it comes to like pain, it can be a very, very tricky subject to sort of navigate, especially when you're starting exercise. Without diving too far into it, I would say that, like Alan said, like you shouldn't feel sharp pain, or you shouldn't feel like something is really, really off. But like you said, a little bit of discomfort. If you conceptualize like a scale from 0 to 10, 0 is nothing, 10 is the worst pain ever. If you're feeling something around like that 0, 1, 2, 3 out of 10, but it's not getting worse, it's staying very stable around that range, you could probably conceive that you're not doing any damage, it's probably fine, and as you get used to it, that level should come down a little bit as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good clarification.
Yeah. And now thinking about, because of COVID, a lot of us are at home, we don't have a lot of equipment, so we have to think about, and when it comes to stress, how can we make things harder? Now, there are a couple of ways to do this, even if you don't have a lot of that heavy equipment that would be found in a typical gym. The first one is to increase what is called time under tension. So for example, if you were to do a simple bodyweight squat, you can make that bodyweight squat harder by taking longer to come down. So for example, if you were to do a typical squat, you come down, pop right back up, maybe at a total of 1 second. If you can prolong the amount of time that the muscles are working, if you can come down let's say at a 4-second count, so like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then come up, you're making those muscles work longer, and therefore it will be harder and you'll get more adaptation from that. Again, you can apply that to everything. Whatever you're doing, let's say, again, back to our bicep curl example, if you come down very slowly, you're going to make it harder and you're going to feel it a lot more. The other thing that you can use is a backpack or a gym bag, anything that you can find at home, and you can put textbooks in it, you can put whatever weights you have in it, you can put whatever you want into the bag, and you can use that as a sort of makeshift weight. So again, if you're going to do a squat and you have a backpack and you put some textbooks in there, you're going to actually add some extra load and some extra weight to it, which again is going to make it harder.
And it's not like anyone uses their textbooks for anything when they're in school, so you can get your money's worth out of them.
Yeah, it's true. I'm just kind of collecting dust on my shelf.
Right, exactly.
Use. But the other thing as well is if you are thinking about combining the two, so now you go back to your typical squat example, you go down very slow with the backpack on your back, suddenly that can become pretty taxing, and that's an easy way to make things harder for you at home. The other thing is, when we're working with heavy weights at a gym, a lot of times between sets, we'll take a good 1-2 minute break just to sort of recharge and then get to our next set. At home, and we're not working with as heavy weights, another way that you can make it harder on yourself is just decreasing that time between sets, right? So where you would typically take 1 minute or 2 minute break, if you cut that down to 30 seconds, you'll be feeling like the exercise is going to get a lot harder, a lot quicker. And then if you're thinking about, making the workout easier, right? If you just want to sort of get back into it at a lighter intensity, again, very simple. You do less reps, you do less sets, or you go quicker with the exercises. All things that can really kind of relieve the amount of stress you put on yourself. Or you can also, spend more time between sets, take a longer rest. And you can also, if something is hurting you at a certain range. So let's say, for example, back to the squat example, if you're coming down and you find that at about 90 degrees or about halfway to the ground that you're starting to feel some sharp pain in your knee, if you simply don't go quite as low, if you cut that at about 75 degrees or maybe 60, just a little bit higher than you would usually go, that's fine too. And you can still get a good exercise out of that without going into that painful range.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great. It's really important. So, and if there's any takeaway from this whole webinar, it's that exercise doesn't have to be complicated. You pick your exercise, and then some of the push, pull, the legs, and the carry. So you can do like a push-up or just pulling it with a resistance band, or with a light weight or the backpack. And then you either make it harder or easier depending on how it feels. So if you load your backpack up with a couple of books, that's all you have. I don't have any more weight than this. Then you say, okay, I'm going to hold the position for longer. I'm going to rest for less time. So it's all about manipulating those small little variables to adjust how difficult or how easy that exercise is. The last point we want to talk about is recovery. And this is really important and really overlooked because we spend so much time talking about the workouts themselves. Everything's focused on the right workout program, the right types of exercises, how many sets, how many reps, and everyone forgets what the big picture is. And that's recovery. Stress is the exercise is the stress you put on your body, but whether or not the exercise actually is effective depends on how you adapt to that stress. And the big adaptation happens with recovery. And so how you act or how you behave between those exercise bouts makes the biggest difference. So number one, you can't go hard every day. You have to take rest days. And you need to mix some light days into their schedule. Most runners aren't running more than 2 or 3 days a week. So when we get on these running programs, we try and run every day. That's when people get into trouble. So make sure you're mixing in some light days. You can't go hard all the time. So lighter weights, lower volumes, whether it's lifting less weight, running less distance, cycling less distance, whether you just want to walk quickly uphill, right? So kind of do more of a flatter walk, whatever your level is, you just want to kind of tap into that and manipulate those variables in the direction you need. Now, Julian talked about at the beginning, it's so important, sleep hygiene. We all don't sleep enough. Whether it's because we can't sleep, we have things on our mind. I know we all have things on our mind right now. We're probably not sleeping as well as we used to, or we're sleeping way more than we ever used to. Taking care of our sleep, eliminating screen time before bed, and other things that have been scientifically proven to improve the quality of our sleep, not just the quantity, all really, really important things. And then the last thing is diet. Same thing with exercise. Diet is not just for weight loss. This is a narrative that keeps getting perpetuated, and it's just not true. Thinking about eating good food after workout, not starving yourself, not saying, hey, not going to eat, I'm going to work out and not eat afterwards because I'm cutting my calories more. Your body needs calories. Calories are fuel. If you don't refuel your car, we all know what happens, and your body really is no different. General recommendations right now for muscle building are about 1 gram of protein per kilo of body weight. The numbers have come down. We don't actually need as much protein per kilo body or per pound of body weight as we used to think. But making sure you're getting enough protein, you're getting enough veggies. The best, I'm not a nutritionist or dietitian, but the best advice I've ever heard from anybody was a New York Times columnist named Michael Pollan. And he has a book called Eat Food, Not Too Much, Mostly Plants. So eat food is real food with less than 5 ingredients and all ingredients you can pronounce. So no drinking that Sunny D. And then not too much. So making sure you're eating till you're mostly full, but not completely stuffed where you're sitting on the couch and just dying. And then mostly plants, and trying to incorporate as many veggies as you can into every meal. And all that plays into those adaptations to exercise. Because if you just exercise and you don't think about recovery, that's when burnout happens.
I actually saw a study that adding, I think it was 1 cup of beans to your diet per day can have the same effects as reducing your calories by 500 per day, just simply by means of satiation. And, like you eat beans, you're getting your protein, you're getting some healthy calories as well, but you're also feeling full, and you're not likely to, go snack on other things because those beans are so fulfilling. So just like something simple like that, adding a cup of beans to your diet, every day.
It takes so little to get great gains from exercise and diet. We all think it has to be this big thing and we have to be super organized. We don't. We just have to do a little bit more or a little bit less, or eat a little bit more, or cut something out of our diet. And the cumulative effects are so huge. We're running out of time on the webinar here. So let's hit some of the questions here. So in the chat here is, do I get a diminishing return on doing the same exercises or stretches in the same order every day? Should I be switching it up? And so the answer is, yeah, you should always be mixing it up. Give it a couple of weeks to work on the same thing. But your body, we said before that the body isn't always used to novel stimuli and doesn't always recognize them. And so the more you can mix things up with your movement, the better. Now you want to give it enough time so you can adapt to the novel stimulus. Once you've adapted, you got to mess with your body a little bit, right? You need to stress yourself in order to grow. It's like anything. We thrive when we're challenged. So you want to once you're used to that kind of movement or that routine, you want to challenge yourself a little more, because that's when us as humans, that's where we thrive.
I would say as well to that, like, you don't necessarily have to change the type of exercise that you're doing. Like, you don't have to, if you're doing squats, you don't have to just, well, I can't do squats anymore because I did it for 4 weeks. I'll try to do something else. You don't have to do that per se, but you definitely have to either increase what we talked about, like the amount of load that you're using or the volume that you're doing it at. So you can keep doing an exercise that you like again, for example, squats. You don't have to change that, but you definitely have to increase the difficulty of them, or else, yeah, like the returns will be diminishing because your body will adapt to that stress, and then it will have nothing else to adapt to.
Perfect. And the last question here is, how can I gauge where my body is actually restricted? Referential and sympathetic responses confuse me to where the problem is. That's a big question. That's almost like a webinar in and of itself. It's so hard to tell, and feelings of tightness and restriction are so nebulous, and they're tied into so many things that really it takes time to kind of get to know your body and what is a real danger and what is just feelings of stiffness because of a lack of activity or other things. Yeah, so maybe we'll do a webinar or like a Instagram TV at another date on that. That's a huge question and something we'll address. But the short and quick answer is it takes time. But the key is that just because you feel restriction, don't feel like you're injured, don't feel like you can't do something. Keep working out, keep feeling good. Use a high level of pain as your guide, kind of like what Julian said earlier. But don't let yourself get owned by those feelings of restriction or tightness just because they're there. Really find things that feel good and move through them. And generally, when people start moving through those patterns, they start to feel better.
And I will, like, again, it's a dense topic to unpack, but if I were to give like a sort of summative response to that, I would say that
we got like 30 seconds left.
All right, pressure's on now, but I would say that when you feel tightness, pain, sensations like that, you can't necessarily just immediately think of them as harmful. A lot of times it's just an alarm for the body saying, hey, I'm not quite used to this. So again, not inherently dangerous, but maybe something that you want to slowly push into or work through because your body's usually just not quite used to that or not used to going past that level.
All right, so that's the time we have, guys. You can always reach out to us on Instagram